Welcome back to another reading and correcting of Stepping Up with me, Kindar, the Tigerite, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. Today we are doing chapter 67. Tibs looked at them, Jackal, Carino, and Krosef, and wished he could wash away the worry off their face. He wanted to offer them comfort, but how could he when he was the cause? He was who they worried about. It was why they were in Krosef's room again, and why he was here this time. The first time he'd been told everything about what Tibs had done since getting his first audience with Water. Krosef had been surprisingly accepting of what Tibs had been told was impossible even after he'd done it. Maybe being surrounded by people who could wield essence, and with a dungeon changed to continuously challenge the runners, made the impossible less so for him. He wished that telling them not to worry, he was fine, would be enough. Instead, he pointed out he wasn't that important in the end. We need to be out there, helping the town. That doesn't sound so different from the Tibs I know, Joseph said. Tibs, Jekyll said, how about we go out there, find my father and kill him so he can't hurt anyone in the town anymore? Tibs couldn't believe what he heard. No, violence isn't going to solve this. I need to find him and soothe the pain that's causing him to act out like this. To explain there's a better way. I wanted to head out immediately. The sooner he found Sebastian, the quicker this could stop and everyone would be better. But he'd agreed to stay with his friends until they were satisfied he was fine. And judging by the expression, they weren't there yet. Okay, Tibbs said, that's too nice even for Tibbs. And you said every element makes him act differently? Karina nodded. I only saw water and fire. Tickle saw him using earth. With water, he wants to help everyone. With fire, he wants to burn the entire town down. Like there was only rage inside him. Is that what fire is? No, Jekyll said. I've asked the runners here who have fire as their element. They don't describe fire as being angry. Eager is how one of them described it. Running hot is how another one did. Tibbs' understandable anger at what those men were doing became an uncontrollable rage. So his anger triggered the fire? Krosef asked. I didn't call on fire because I was angry. All I had was a knife, and I wanted them to be afraid so they'd stop. He paused. Shouldn't have wanted that. Sure, it doesn't help. Once I called on fire is when I lost control. Krosef looked around his room. Why are we doing this in the inn then? What if he loses control? That's why we are doing this with water, Jekyll said. We need to understand how to have Tibbs channel essence without his personality changing. Tibbs can make ice, Krosef pointed out, and the weather's turning warmer. What if he decides that icing everything is how he'll make everyone feel better? Then I don't think anywhere in the town's safe, Jekyll replied. He said his main reserve is basically bottomless, and it becomes whatever he's channeling. So maybe have him not channel through it? Krosef asked uncertainly. That isn't how it works, Kina said. At least I don't think it is. This isn't something I've read about, but when I channel, I just do it. I don't decide how it just happens. Maybe if he had his bracers, he could do it. I need to think about pulling from my amulet, but we don't have that. Back to yourself, Tibbs, Jekyll instructed. Why? Tibbs asked. I can do so much good using my essence. Jekyll ran a hand over his face. I think we're trying for too much. We should just get him. We should just get him to let it go on command. That way we can tell him when to stop if he starts losing control like he did with fire. He'll be more helpful if he remains in control while using essence, Karina countered. Sure. But it's not like we have the time, Jekyll snapped. I know you just got here, but we're in the middle of a war. Krosef stepped before the fighter. Calm down, and you know she isn't dismissing what's happened. It's how she handles problems. Jekyll looked at Krosef and let out a breath. I'd love to have some amazing weapon to throw at my father, but right now, it gives us danger to the town. He isn't a weapon. Karina snapped, stepping up and stopping at Krosef's hand on her chest. He's our friend, and he needs our help. This was at a loss as to how to help calm them. They weren't listening to each other. What would they listen to him? Hey, Tibbs, Joseph said, crouching before him, pulling his attention away from the mounting argument. They're just scared. That's why they're snapping at each other. They'll get over it. Tibbs nodded, but he bit his lower lip. He needed to help them reach that point now, not later. Tell me, Joseph said, drawing his attention to him again. Why do you think you need your essence to help? Because with it, I can soothe the pain away. Tibbs touched Joseph's temple with a finger and let essence flow over him. His friend smiled. I appreciate the effort, but you might need more training to do anything more than get me wet. I'm sorry, Tibbs whispered. Well, I have all this essence, and I keep forgetting all I've learned to do with it is commit violence. Why would I do that? That's not true. Joseph took Tibbs in his. You've used water to put out the fire. You've used your very own essence to heal your teammates. You've always used the best tool to help with the rest of us. To help the rest of us. It's the only way I have to help now. Joseph smiled. The most helpful thing you ever did, you did without using an element. You convinced Dawn, a man you really don't like, to speak to Harry. You avoided a lot of death and violence that way, without using an element. You talked the merchants into accepting your help against Jackal's father. You kept the runners from thinking only about themselves. You got them to work together to tell each other how to survive the dungeon, even if the guild forbids that. Smile. You've talked sense through the thick thing my man likes to call his head. He squeezed Tibbs' hand. Your elements, they're important, but they aren't why you're strong. You were that before you got your first audience. You need to remember that the only thing your elements do is make you stronger, not that you are weak without them. Tibbs nodded slowly. Thank you. Now, please let go of water. Tibbs did so, and his perception of the people in the room shifted. He hugged Joseph tightly, taking him by surprise. I'm glad you're okay, he whispered, his eyes getting wet. Joseph chuckled and hugged him back. I'm glad too, but this is about helping you. You did. But I don't know how easy it's going to be with the other elements. I couldn't think when I used fire, just act. With earth, I was so comfortable I didn't worry about anything. I was certain that all I had to do was take my time and I'd find a solution to any problem. Tibbs thought back to how he'd felt when he'd used each of the element in the courtyard. None of them was the right way to do it. I can't protect anyone if all I want to do is help everyone. I can't keep people safe if I don't think about what I'll do, but I can't just think about what I can do either. I can't just think about what I could do either. Jekyll squeezed Joseph's shoulder. Seems like each element represents only a part of who we are, but individually they aren't enough. Just like one element isn't enough to make anything real, like that bed, chair, or a tankard of ale. That's not right, Kirina said. They don't represent us. They existed before we... I don't think that now's the time for a lesson, Tip said. I think you'd be curious about what we know of the elements. She smiled. You usually don't seem to care what else we should be doing. I'm usually not at war, he replied. We need to focus on saving the town. Oh, then you can tell me about why I think differently when I'm using an element. He took Joseph's hand in his. And saving the town means I need to learn how to switch between elements at my will. Tibbs roared in anger as he unleashed fire on the thugs trying to escape. Tibbs, stop! Jekyll ordered. Over the last 8 days, Tibbs had no success in deciding to stop calling on an element. The inside of 2 unused warehouses attested to the damage fire could do. It was the most volatile of the elements he had, so the one he'd worked harder getting to let go. Tibbs let fire go. While he hadn't managed to exert his will over the element, they had reached a point where, even under one of their influence, he listened to an order to stop. I'm calling on water, he told the fighter, and didn't wait for an acknowledgement. He didn't have the time. He chastised himself for always reverting to violence as he spread the water over the fire he had started, extinguishing them. This was the last time. himself. He would never call on fire again or any of the other elements. His role was to soothe and comfort, and he could only do that by wielding water. Let it go, Tibs. He looked into Jackal's stern face and opened his mouth to explain why he couldn't. I said, let it go, Tibs. Reluctantly, he did. You okay? His friend asked, searching his eyes. Just strange how water is the hardest to let go of. With how out of control fire makes me, you'd think that would be the hardest one. It was knowing there was so much sorrow out there. Tibbs thought that made water so stubborn. The other elements had proved easier to let go, although he avoided Earth whenever possible because of how slowly he thought. He had no problem letting it go, but the time it took between hearing Jackal's order and doing it meant he wasn't helping for much longer. He wasn't helping, but the time it took between hearing Jackal's order and doing it meant he wasn't helping during that time. Time it took doing it was not helping. I'll leave that one to my editor. The one element he didn't use under any circumstances was corruption. When they had tried it, Tibbs had nearly talked Jackal into going out with him so they could melt Sebastian's face off. 8 days of training, as often as he could with letting go, and it was the first time Jackal had been confident enough for the two of them to go out on patrol. He told the others, then had to reassure them he'd make sure Tibbs was safe. What Tibbs would do was talk to Stowe, find out if he could open this door so the others could be recalled. Unfortunately, this was the fourth group of Sebastian's people they'd run into. You know, Jekyll said as he searched one of the burned corpses, the one downside to fire is that you don't leave loot for me to get. If you want, I'll let Walther soothe the next group into not running away if you think they'll get you more loot. Fire and water were the two Tibbs had used the most. Air was too playful or too slow, and of the rest, he didn't know enough about how to use them to do anything useful, even with all the assets at his disposal. I'd settle for less loot if it meant my father doesn't find out what he can do. He's still going to want me dead. If he finds out what you can do, he isn't going to want you dead anymore. He's going to want you collared like an animal. Tibbs sensed around them, pushing away the image that brought up. Instead of a clear way, or another patrol, he sensed a group in a house. There's a family huddled together in that house. You think they'll be safe until we come back? Tibbs glared at the fighter. Getting more runners here will help more people, Tibbs, and we need the dungeon to be open for that. We don't know if Stowe's even ready. They are endangered now. Let's be careful, Jekyll said. We've had instances where my father's people acted like scared town folks to lure us in. Tibbs picked up the short sword he'd taken after his first encounter. He wasn't good with it, but it had better reach than a knife. The pommel was singed more now. The leather was starting to peel off. He never let go of it quickly enough when he called on fire. Cautiously walked around the house, peering through the windows at the empty rooms. They'd hidden in a small room, probably at the sound of the fighting, one that only had one door Tibbs could see. He sensed 5 people, 2 who were small, so Tibbs didn't think they were Sebastian's people, but as Jekyll had said, they could be sneaky. 2 doors were locked. The 2 doors were locked and the ground floor windows latched. Tibbs didn't have tools and couldn't use water. Another reason to head to the rooming house soon. Stopped Jekyll from kicking the door in by pointing at the open window on the first floor. The fighter nodded, then threw Tibbs in. Once Tibbs got over his surprise and up from the floor, he stepped to the window and glared down at the grinning fighter. Once he had control of his elements, Jekyll was going to pay. The fighter made a shooing motion, and Tibbs moved away from the window. He was going to burn all the loot Jekyll had ever found. Wow, man, did I ever found. Down the stair, he opened the door and looked in. The five were at the back, the man and woman pulling the two small children to themselves tighter, while the older one stood to interpose himself. He looked scared, but determined. The pantry shelves were nearly empty, and they looked like he'd felt partway through Val. Are any of you hurt? Yes. His element was the one that didn't cause. His element was the one. That's the only one. Only one that didn't cause him to act differently. And since he could use it without anyone noticing, so long as he didn't wrap it over broken limbs, he figured it was the one thing he could still do to actively help. I'm Tibs, he said when they didn't reply or move. I'm a runner. I'm with the town. Jackal's waiting outside. We'll take you somewhere safe. That got them moving, but hesitatingly so. He didn't want to think what else they'd had to do to survive this long. Why they were the only ones he could sense in any of the houses. As he led them out of the house, Tibbs couldn't shake the feeling this part of the town was now very much like his street had been. Tibbs looked around the broken crates, spilling pots and broken furniture. He would have never guessed that having so much fun would result in this much chaos. Joseph was in Jacob's arm, and Karina next to them against the wall. There was a line of debris before them, marking where she'd been able to keep anything from hitting them, but they looked scared. Sorry, he said, face burning. This had been a celebration, in part. This had been a celebration, in part. Not of finally letting go of the element when he wanted to, that happened days ago, but of retrieving his bracers and air knives. It had started as a test of him pulling essence from the bracers, hoping it would let him use the elements and not have his personality affected. Now, this is why I need to do this, because, man, is there a lot of time. He'd picked air because he felt playful, and he had his knives. It had felt so good not to worry about anything and just enjoy himself. Of course, that meant he hadn't worried about the damage he'd caused. This wasn't quite as much as while he worked with fire, but only because air couldn't spread the damage to other buildings. Are you sure the owner doesn't mind us using his warehouse to practice? Joseph asked worriedly. Don't worry, Jekyll said casually. We've cleared it. It's fine. His man narrowed his eyes at the fighter. Do you even know who owns this warehouse? Jekyll shrugged. Not your family, I know that for sure. The information's right, Jabba said. Something's happened. There's a dozen archers on the rooftop watching around the platform. Why does your father keep getting them? Irina asked. Just in the last 6 days, you and Tibs have to have taken out 24 of them. Pickle shrugged. Archer is easy for my father to get. The king's always training some, but he doesn't pay that much. He doesn't pay all that much. A handful of silver will get my father a regiment of them. But we haven't seen anyone arrive in a week, right? She looked around at the others. Tibbs nodded, as did the rogues who spied on the platform. Knowing my father, if he didn't bring hundreds of them with his first group, he had them trickle in way before that. Even if he knew the guild wasn't going to be a problem, the town's full of runners. He knew he'd need a lot of people to deal with us, even only a few of us. Tibbs frowned. But how didn't Harry notice? That's a lot of people with a lot of weapons. Weapons could be brought in crates marked as something else, he said. They might even have come in via one of the caravans. How Knuckles missed this is something that's going to have to wait until he gets his ass out of that building. Yeah, this I need to say. That goes up flatly. He should be out already, Tip said, more to himself. He should be keeping the town safe. He'd sneaked out in the night to try to get to Harry and ask him why, but he hadn't made it. Miguel must have something to let them know when someone approached, because as soon as he stepped into the street opposite the building, he felt adventurers manipulating essence and had retreated. Tibs said Harry's job isn't protecting the town, it's maintaining order. But Tibs started among the derision of the older Tibbs started among the derision the older runners let out. Nope, Jekyll said, it's not even that. I told you, us Wells only do two things. We give orders or we obey them, and it's the rare Wells who gives them. Does what the Gills tells him, and as we know, they aren't going to get off their asses unless the dungeon is under threat. Speaking of which, the door's still closed. Tibbs went to Stowe every night, but the dungeon had yet to acknowledge his presence. Look, Jabba said, do we really have the time for questions and discussions? We need to get ready for whatever is about to happen. I'm a kid, Tibbs replied, grinning at her. Asking questions is how I learn stuff. Yo, Jekyll warned her, and we're waiting for more information. As far as we know, it isn't happening today, so there's no need to rush. She looked around. Has anyone considered maybe he's holding us back because he wants his father to take over? Jekyll burst out laughing. Jabba, Jabba, Jabba. I know no one's keeping track, and that is a shame, but I am willing to bet a silver that I've killed more of my father's people than anyone here, not to say of those I killed trying to escape him before I landed in this town. The only reason I will see my father out of here alive is because I know his death will cause us more trouble than he's already causing. I will die before I side with him. Tibbs glared at the fighter. Those Archer? He asked Jabba. Where are they? Why is Tibbs glaring? Okay. No. Instead of... Alright. Tibbs glared at the fighter. Those Archers, he asked. He asked Jabba, where are they? And that becomes on. He'd keep them busy with that instead of letting... Instead of letting them go with each other into a fight while they waited for Serba to send more information. And that concludes chapter 67. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to read the story, you can do that on Royal Road for free. If you want to support me and read further ahead, you can do that on my Patreon. If you want to listen to me doing these live, it's on Twitch every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time. And with that, I shall wish you a good day.